Now let's talk about the colonial era, and specifically the regional identities that existed in what would become the United States, the 13 British colonies. There, you can kind of divide them into three major regions. The New England colonies to the north, which kind of economically were founded in shipbuilding and commerce. The middle colonies, which had farming and commerce and really grew a lot of food crops. And then the southern colonies, which grew a lot of cash crops, things like tobacco, cotton, indigo, things that were sold for profit, but things that you wouldn't probably eat. So these regional identities become very important in terms of the political differences between them. In the South, the idea of slavery becoming a big thing because of their economy and what that leads to in terms of conflict between these different regions when they later become the United States. These regional identities are very, very important. For the exam, you also want to know just a little bit about how some of the important early colonies were founded. You don't need to know about all of them, but some of the earliest ones are really influential ones. One of them is the Jamestown settlement, which was in Virginia. And this was the first permanent British settlement in North America. Prior to that, they had had a failed attempt to establish one under Sir Walter Raleigh, but this was the first sort of lasting permanent one, and it was founded by the London Company, which is an organization of merchants who were basically given a charter. And most of these colonies were basically founded because the royal crown gave a charter to somebody, either a group of business people or a single royal person who backed the crown or what have you. But people were given charters to establish and govern colonies. Another important one was the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which was established by Puritans, separatists who basically wanted to break away from the church and sort of establish a more pure church in the Americas, sort of a Bible commonwealth. And these were basically the Pilgrims that we famously think of in the Plymouth Colony. That was the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and it spread out to other colonies as well. It created places like Rhode Island and Connecticut, New Hampshire, sort of broke and spread out from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. New York, another important colony, actually was set up initially before it became New York. It was basically settlements by the Dutch, but as the British got more and more control, they basically overtook the Dutch, and they gave this region to the Duke of York, who was the brother of King Charles II of England, who was running the show in England at the time. And so the Duke of York established his colony there, hence New York. And New York City used to be the Dutch city of New Amsterdam, but when the English took it over, then it became eventually New York. The area of Pennsylvania was founded by Quakers. That's another sort of farming and religious group. So those are some important ones to know. And there were lots of different reasons that different ones were founded. Rhode Island, for example, founded so that people could have more religious freedom and things like that. And some of them just sort of purely for economic reasons or for political reasons in terms of who backed the royal crown and was given a charter. But those are some good ones to know for the exam. During the colonial era, the French and Indian War was fought in the Americas, and the French and Indian War was really an extension of the 7 Years' War, which was being fought between the British and the French over in Europe. And on the side of the French were also the Spanish. So the Spanish and the French had sort of teamed up against Britain. And they sort of extended that war into the Americas, where the Native Americans or Indians were recruited alongside the French and Spanish. So they were the French were not fighting the Indians. The French and the Indians were fighting the British and the British colonists. But despite everybody basically having ganged up against the British still won the French and Indian War, and they won the 7 Years' War. And because of this, Britain got a lot of new territory, basically all of what is now Canada, as well as all of the French territory east of Mississippi River, other than New Orleans, and also Florida. Florida was held by the Spanish, and it was ceded to the British as a spoil of war. Because the Spanish had sort of fought alongside the French, and now lost this territory. The French basically compensated their ally by giving them the Louisiana Territory, this large region that was later the Louisiana Purchase. It was held by the Spanish for a very long time, and then finally was ceded back to the French, and then in a very short period of time, the French turned around and sold it to what was then the United States at that point. We'll talk about that in other sections. But all of that territory that we talked about came to be held by the British as a result of their victory in the French and Indian War. So this gave them a lot of new power in North America, but it also brought problems along with it. One of the problems it brought was serious debt. Because of fighting this big war, the British national debt had doubled, and that meant that they needed to basically generate more revenue, so they started to tax the colonists more, and they started to try to do things like that. And also, they needed to put soldiers in this region to basically control all these new territories that they had. So they needed British colonists to quarter these soldiers, which the British colonists were not happy about. They also needed to sort of navigate their relationships very carefully with the Native Americans living in these new territories that they had won in the French and Indian War. So they made some rules about colonists not being able to expand out to the west into new territories where they had treaties with the Native Americans. And this also angered the colonists. So there were a number of things that came out of this that angered the colonists and started to build sort of some seeds of animosity between the colonists and the British government, and also which spread British resources very, very thin. So these are important influences in terms of what will lead up to some of the factors that lead up to the American Revolution, and that lead to some issues with British power in the New World. And these stem from this French and Indian War.